Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Megan Efforts, Vice President of Marketing at Archway, and I want to welcome you to the webinar, Next Generation Marketing Fulfillment, How Food and Beverage Firms Benefit from a Strategic Approach. I also have with me today Dave Franklin and Tanya Labrador. Dave is Vice President Research Director at Forrester, and Tanya is Manager of Merchandising, Operations, and Development at Otis Spunkmeyer. Thank you for being with us. Archway has partnered with Forrester Research to understand how companies are executing their marketing and sales material fulfillment programs and the opportunities that exist to reduce costs and gain visibility. Today, Dave is going to share key findings from the research he conducted and explain what food and beverage companies can do to make improvements. In addition, Tanya will be sharing insights on how Otis Spunkmeyer, a leader in sweet baked goods, has been able to begin optimizing the execution of their marketing, fulfillment, and sales support materials and the results that they're seeing. And then I'll follow up the presentation with a quick information and sharing key components you should look for in food and beverage fulfillment solution and a little bit about Archway. For now, though, I'll hand it over to Dave to get started.
Great, thanks, Megan, and good morning or good afternoon to everyone on the phone. I'm delighted to be here, and thank you to Archway for inviting us. For those of you who don't know Forrester, we are an independent research organization, and I sit on the customer intelligence team, so we do a lot of research around all of the information that we capture, manage and integrate, analyze, and then use about customers. So hopefully it's pretty clear from that where fulfillment fits into that coverage area. As Megan alluded to, Archway came to us a while ago and sort of asked us if we would be interested in doing some research in this area. And what we did was we sort of collaborated on how best to look at what's going on in the world of fulfillment today, and we discovered some pretty interesting stuff, some pretty divergent approaches that companies are taking. So what we're going to do is walk you through some of that research. Before we do that, I wanted to start off with just a definition. While most or many of you on the phone probably live in a world of fulfillment, just so that we all know what we're talking about and talking about the same thing, this is how we define, for the purposes of the study, we actually gave this definition at the beginning of the research. And rather than me reading this out to you, I mean, the couple of things I would call out here are the notion of this being not for sale items, and then the distribution of those to any sort of touch points or customer points of sale. With that, I mean, I think, you know, on a day-to-day basis, we all encounter, again, sort of in our professional lives, most of us on the phone are probably heavily engaged with this, but in our personal lives too, every store we walk into, every restaurant, every bank branch, etc., we're just bombarded with a variety of items in all sorts of different shapes and forms that need to be fulfilled in some shape or form. It has to go through a very distinct, deliberate, and accurate process to get that in the right place at the right time. And so if we took one example of sort of a fast food restaurant, you know, the opportunity for things to go wrong, as we all know, are immense. So the idea of getting all the right signage displaying at the right time, so if we took today as an example, you know, does the Halloween stuff come down today in every store? Does the Thanksgiving stuff go up, etc.? And how do you make sure that even in this case where you've got sort of where it's on something you might hand somebody, so bags, in this case cups, whatever else, all the way through packaging, through signage display, and display inside in windows, at the countertop, etc. It's a massive undertaking. B, it has a very significant impact on customer experience. And it's a phrase I'm going to continually come back to as we go through this. One of the things we found as we did this research is that there's a very stark difference in how different companies approach fulfillment and how they think about fulfillment from a cultural point of view. And for some, this is something that needs to be done, and it's something that is a cost where we need to extract as much of the cost as possible. And for others, this is something that actually impacts the experience that a customer has with our organization, and as such is a strategic role within marketing and is engaged as such. So with that as background, let me just quickly go through a quick agenda that I'm going to go through this portion of today's session. I'm going to start out with some overarching findings from that research study. I'll give a really quick methodology background in terms of who we spoke to, and then get into some of the sort of basic findings, if you like. What's the state of the state as it relates to fulfillment today, based on the respondents that we spoke to? Then we'll get into some of the really fun stuff. Let's look at sort of the differences between companies and how they responded, particularly around sort of what we refer to as sophistication or maturity. And then we'll sort of wrap that up with some of the key takeaways that we hope you remember from this, but also some of the things that you can start to do differently or start to implement pretty much as soon as you hang up the phone today. So starting out with the study itself, let me give you, I literally have one slide. I don't want to bore everyone with methodology, but I think it's important just to understand the research that we did and the sort of breadth and depth of it. So we surveyed 248 different companies, all in North America, and we split that across 8 verticals, and I'll show you that on the next slide, the verticals we spoke to. All of the respondents or participants had to be decision makers within the company, responsible for managing marketing fulfillment, and we went into pretty good detail as to whether they sort of held budget, influenced budget, etc. And we weeded out anyone that didn't have true sort of authority or influence over fulfillment in their organization. And then finally, the respondents had to be at a firm with a minimum of 500 employees. And as you can see here, a significant group of those, so we spread those across different sizes of companies, but a third of the respondents almost had more than 20,000. So ranging from sort of mid-sized companies in that 500 employee range all the way up to some of the largest companies. And it was a relatively broad study. We looked across a number of different topics. We looked at just the sort of the who, why, what, when, if you like, of what people do. There is a thought leadership paper that was written on the back of this that's available from Archway. So if you want to dig deeper into some of what we're discussing today, you can apply. Megan, I'm sure, will give details on how to get that from the team. So there's a lot more in that paper than we're going into today. And then, as I mentioned, we sort of did this across a range of industries. And I'll sort of, in some cases, in slide format, and in other cases, in voiceover, I'll describe some of the differences in the food and beverage category. So at Forrester, when we report on categories, we require a minimum of 30 respondents per category to give a percentage, which we do have in this case. With that said, there's still a sort of fairly large margin of error between the differences. And so there's a couple of cases where I can sort of point to things that were statistically valid. Other cases where I'll sort of say, it was a really minor or we did see some difference, but it wasn't statistically valid, et cetera, as we go through. But where I'm not discussing the differences with food and beverage, it's fair to assume that there wasn't a huge gap between the overall response base of that 248 respondents and the 30 food and beverage companies that did respond. So starting off, again, I gave you the definition a little earlier, but one of the first questions we asked all respondents was what they fulfill within their organization. And quickly it became very apparent that it goes across a very wide range of touch points. You can see here, and again, this is the full response base here, all 248 respondents. By far and large, documentation being the largest response, but still a good chunk of people sort of responding across the board. We did do a cut of this by the food and beverage respondents, and you'll see a bit of change when I bring up that next slide. You'll see, for example, the documentation drops down to sort of the third in the list here, and digital sales materials, which is just at 38% in the middle of this pack, drops right down to the bottom. So just to help reorient your view on this slide here, the top bar now on this graph is the food and beverage respondents, and the lower sort of darker color is all respondent base. And you can see the sort of change here. The point of sale went up significantly, samples went up. Perhaps not a huge surprise in those two. The one that really jumped out at me, as I say, was the sort of the drop in documentation was less of a surprise. I think the digital sales material, seeing the disparity between that and others, was certainly counted as significant in our view. We also asked respondents about sort of what's important to them. What do they think about? What are their key considerations as it relates to fulfillment? And perhaps not a huge surprise, especially given the economy we all live in, but I think also the historical sort of nature of this role, that cost tops that list, and cost by a margin tops that list. It's good to see sort of quality of materials, timeliness up there, but there's a big drop down. I did sort of, teaser alert at the start in terms of my focus on customer experience. Only a third of the respondents referencing customer experience as one of the areas that's important to them when they're considering fulfillment within their firm. And as I say, that's something you'll hear me come back to throughout the entire session, because really we found that that's the thing that pops. That's when we look at sophistication, when we look at what separates out the leaders from the laggards, a lot of it comes down to this notion of, it's kind of soft things like culture is one of the big things we'll talk about within my portion here. And it's one of those things, well, what do you mean by that? And so we actually asked the question, when people selected that as one of their things, we said, sort of, you selected this as one of the most important things. What does optimal customer experience mean within your organization? And we got a variety of responses from sort of the material, the requirement that effectively communicate our ideas in a way that strikes the customer's needs. So, again, to go to that sort of philosophical or cultural response there of the emphasis on the customer need. You can see on many of these we pulled out sort of there's another one that talks about service philosophy, customer experience, 100% customer satisfaction, as well as the sort of more sort of customer sentiment, if you like, that our customers are impressed. But we heard a lot of those types. These are illustrative of the overall response that we got, really drilling into this is all about the customer having a better experience with my organization, not just sort of the people sort of like signage, whatever else it might be that is on display. So switching gears a little, another question we asked many of or all of the respondents was about their use of external partners. So while we spoke to them about challenges they face, et cetera, one of the questions we asked was, whether they outsource and use other partners to help with their fulfillment. What we heard was that just under half are using less than 5, so 44% using between 1 and 5 vendors, and the next largest group using between 6 and 15. With, as you can see, sort of ever-decreasing circles almost, but some using sort of north of 20. You can see there's a sort of more than 10% using 21 or above. And so what we wanted to do, just as to make this a little bit interactive, which is always difficult on a webinar, is to sort of say, what types of firms are you guys interacting with? So you're going to see a polling question come up, and we'd ask you sort of which type of vendor does your firm use for marketing fulfillment? And I'll just, you guys can read hopefully, but you got printing companies, shipping companies, and sort of I'll give you some examples here that we gave in the survey. There was printers such as R.R. Donnelley, Vertus, Vistaprint, shippers and freight companies like an Expedx, FedEx, ad agencies like an Ogilvy Wunderman, fulfillment specialists like an Archway, J Group, Fulfillment America, a combination of all of the above. So I think we're going to leave that open, and I'll keep moving, and when we get the results, I'll share those with you as we hear them. What I'm going to do is actually bring up the results we had from the survey, and then I'll compare them to the answers we've received on the call so far. So from you guys, you can see here printers on top, which is was also the largest response we got on the call today. So 25% of respondents chose printers. Obviously, when we did the survey in the field, there was multiple choices allowed. Fulfillment house was the second highest on the call today. That's at 20%, followed by shippers at 15%, combination at 15%, and agency at 13%. I think I've mentioned everybody there. So sort of generally similar. What we found in the survey when we did a cut of this by food and beverage firms, there wasn't that much difference. They were ever so slightly more likely to use a printer and sort of ever so slightly less likely to use everything else, but it wasn't that statistically significant. So you can sort of take this as read, and as we saw, generally we're in a similar boat, higher percentage on the phone using fulfillment specialists, but given that the sponsor of the webinar is one of those, it may skew those results a little. When we look at sort of who's making these decisions, who's driving the decision of who firms are going to work with, so it's one thing to work with multiple providers, who's actually driving that decision? What we learned was that sort of marketing is leading that in many cases, in most cases. So as you can see here, sort of by far the lion's share here, 40% of firms told us that marketing leads, but they're supported by procurement. What was interesting is that sort of the next highest response is actually procurement leads and marketing participates. Further down is sort of marketing led without procurement, and pretty low down here is procurement led without marketing. But when you add up the sort of procurement led, it accounts for fully a quarter of companies for whom procurement takes the lead. And so as you're thinking about vendors, who you work with, the satisfaction you have with them, we'll talk about challenges that firms told us they face in a second. I think it really underscores the importance of taking ownership of that, and where you may not sort of have, in some firms there's legal reasons why procurement would lead, etc., but really dedicating time and effort to making sure you do select the right partner. Can't overstate it enough. And again, sort of another spoiler alert, when we asked about what were the top challenges that folks faced, you can see that 2 of the top 3 here related to their vendor partners. So one was sort of compliance in terms of meeting their SLAs and deadlines. Another was their sort of ability to react to last-minute order changes. So 2 of the top 3, as you can see, a lot of the top results here, and these results are actually continued onto a future slide. I'm going to spend a couple of heading changes here and just call out a few different things on this slide. But I really do think it's crucial to sort of, again, not get forced into that relationship that you sort of end up then in a relationship that may not be best for your business, but might be best sort of purely on a cost basis or something like that. As you can see, speaking of cost, budgetary limitations definitely hit the sort of quote-unquote above the fold challenges that folks are facing, and generally lack of budget either to support quality or accuracy and timely delivery. So split across those 2, it pops up pretty high. And then you've sort of heard me talk about culture now a couple of times. This whole sort of delay in receiving approvals from internal stakeholders, and in some cases the internal stakeholders actually affecting the vendor ability to hit their deadline. And so we added this up along with what's on the next slide in terms of the executive support as a sort of this cultural importance that's placed on marketing fulfillment, and the need for all of us to sort of elevate the respect that fulfillment gets within the organization to become a core part of the marketing process, and not sort of an afterthought and an area that's just squeeze costs out of. So let me use that as a pivot point, and what I want to do is turn to sort of focus on that sort of the differences, the sophistication and maturity that we saw across different firms. And we started this by asking all of the respondents to sort of quote-unquote self-report their level of sophistication. And this was a question that we just sort of said, on a scale of 1 to 5, how effective do you believe your company's approach to fulfillment is compared to your peers? And you can see we've got generally something close to a bell curve. Just so everybody knows, again, this is the all respondents. The food and beverage responses were a tiny bit higher on the sort of more effective, that number 2, and but not significantly, and everything else was just down a tiny bit to compensate for it. So you can sort of look on this as generally representative of where folks graded themselves. And as we probably all remember, going back to at least grammar school, if not high school, when you ask people to grade themselves, they tend to overcompensate. And so we deliberately asked the question because we wanted to be able to compare it, but we frankly didn't believe anyone that answered the question, other than those maybe that said that they weren't so good, right? So so instead we took all of the survey responses and we created a sophistication model. We basically took a whole host of different questions. We scored them and weighted the responses depending on where they came in, and we created this model and then categorized firms based on relative maturity. And we came up with 3 levels of maturity. The first of which we called laggards, which is those that we sort of found at a very operational level, sort of functional approach, really just thinking about fulfillment sometimes for fulfillment's sake, and really not much focus on customer centricity. The latents are they're certainly moving in the right direction, making strides, showing some signs of maturity, but there's still a significant gap, and I'm going to show you some of the differences that we saw across each of these levels. And the leaders then are those that sort of treat marketing fulfillment as a strategic function, and that's borne out in the fact that they sort of support it with investment, and there's executive level engagement and sponsorship across the board. So without getting into obviously it would take days to sort of describe the model, but there is a simplified version of that model that's available from, or questionnaire rather, that's available from Archway. But just knowing what you know here based on what I've just told you, we're going to move to our next polling question, which is sort of to ask you, I'm going to lead this up while I ask the question, but would you consider your organization a laggard, a latent, or a leader? So do you feel like you're more operational and functional? Do you feel like you've evolved past that, but you're not yet at a strategic question? And that next question should be popping into the poll there any moment now.
Dave, we're having a little technical difficulty with the poll, so keep going and we'll pop it up.
Okay, do you want me to just keep going? Okay. So I'm gonna if it does end up working, we can still do it. I'll let you know what the responses were. So 52%, more than half, obviously, at that laggard level. So if you were going to call yourself a laggard, you're in, I won't necessarily say good company, but I'll say common company. The latents, a little over a third of respondents sort of in that latent group, and almost 15%, but relatively low number at that leader level. And again, probably not a big surprise to see that so low, given that it's that we are talking about this as a strategic asset within the business. Not statistically significant, but just so everybody sees it and knows, the food and beverage responses that we got, which I would have compared to the group here, was sort of a similar number at the laggard level. That's not statistically significant on the basis we're looking at here, and on any number, but directionally, as I'll show you then on the next slide too, even if you say it's not statistically significant, directionally against other industry verticals where the ends would be similar across each of these verticals, you can see that there are, food and beverage is at the lower half, or certainly in the close to the lower third of responses here. And particularly, I think, you can see some of those groups may have, like financial services and pharma, don't necessarily have that high comparatively of a leader group, but they do have a much lower laggard group, whereas food and beverage has jumped into that category of the larger group with the laggards. Again, directional based on the overall, but interesting based on the comparison to other verticals. So how I'm gonna then sort of portray the rest of the story here is really to sum up, if we were to say sort of what makes a leader versus a laggard versus a latent, is we sort of broke it down into 3 core areas. And that's the culture within the organization. Again, you've heard me talk about that a couple of times now. The analytics and approach to measurement within the organization, and then the technology support and backbone within the organization. And so I'm going to start off on what I think is in many respects the most important, because it's what drives everything else, and that's sort of the cultural component. And this is really what we mean by culture, is sort of defining that approach. And to summarize here before I get into the sort of overall data, we found that the differences that we found were sort of largely around how firms engage fulfillment throughout the marketing process, so sort of the when and how folks get involved, whether fulfillment is employed throughout the organization or whether that's sort of in an ad hoc basis, sort of structured around line of business, again, in that very operational, functional way, or whether folks are thinking about and organizing, how folks are thinking about and organizing the fulfillment function. So to get into the specificity around that, I'm just going to show you the sort of those that strongly agreed and those that agreed with a series of statements that we gave within the survey. So the question here was to the extent to which folks agreed or disagreed that their organization considers marketing fulfillment when making decisions about marketing planning, strategy, and optimization. So as you can see here, sort of over 90% of leaders agree in some shape or form that their fulfillment practice is engaged right the way from planning and strategy through optimization. So it's not just an executional role. Only 2% of laggards agreeing with that strongly. Good to see that sort of 37% are sort of agreeing in some shape or form, but a long way to go to catch up with even the latents, never mind the leaders on that one. So as I said, we sort of looked at it about whether this is a functional approach and asking about whether there's a consistent strategy across lines of business. So again, this is very much the culture. Do we have a culture of effective fulfillment within the business? And again, you can see sort of north of 80% of leaders agreeing, whereas only 30% of laggards agreeing. I referenced this earlier in terms of executive support. So sort of the question here was around whether senior leaders in the organization believed in the strategic business value of marketing fulfillment. So it's a pretty loaded term, right? So the strategic business value of marketing fulfillment. You can see here, again, you're down in the 30s, a third of the respondents are the laggards, probably 2/3 of the latents by the looks of it, and almost 90% of the leaders, again, saying that the senior leaders in the organization believe in the strategic business value of marketing fulfillment. And that, I think that almost sums it all up from a culture point of view. So if you don't have that senior support, if you can't demonstrate the strategic business value, this is almost self-fulfilling, right? It's difficult to get out of that laggard or even evolve beyond the latent stage if you can't demonstrate that value to senior business leaders. And again, going back to the challenges we all face of budget, time, all of the other constraints we're under, it's extremely difficult just to do the operational functional stuff. To me, it sort of says it's worth lifting your head up to sort of look to try to deliver on some of this. And then from the organizational point of view, you've got almost a third of leaders agreeing strongly that they are organized to optimize fulfillment, whereas only 1% of laggards agreeing. Sort of less agreeing at all than leaders who agree strongly that they're well organized. And again, we're up sort of north of 85% of leaders who agree in some shape or form. And I think this whole notion, it's probably linked closely to that line of business answer, in that if you're not organized right, it's very difficult to deliver across all of that. And then the other side of this, I think there was almost the most surprising of this group, and this is my last one on the culture slide, is despite the fact that they're so much further ahead, leaders believing that they will be increasingly important to the marketing organization. So it's not like they're sitting back on their laurels and sort of saying we've made it. Not that they knew we categorized them as leaders, but sitting back and going, we are leaders versus our competition. We're actually going to become more important to our marketing organization. We're going to demonstrate greater value to our marketing organization as time goes by. So let's shift gears a little and turn to analytics and measurement. And my heading here sort of relates to this notion that obviously you can't improve what you don't measure. And so within analytics, I'm including measurement because I think it's the only way we can sort of manage and improve what we do. What we heard from firms in terms of the differences we saw when we analyzed these results was there's differences in sort of their measurement activity. and as well as that in how they staff and organize their analytics and measurement functions. So let me first of all show some findings that don't compare the different maturity levels, and then we'll jump back into sort of comparing some of the maturity questions. So starting out, we asked about when it comes to measurement, what does your company assess? And you can see here the sort of orders fulfilled against timeliness was popped out way higher than any of the other responses. Sort of the accuracy, the order accuracy, the delivery accuracy, the inventory being received in a timely fashion, or inventory accuracy. So it popped, but it sort of says to me that with putting words in people's mouths a little bit, it's almost like quality and accuracy are less frequently a focus than sort of the fulfillment within time frame. It's get things out the door and off my plate, with less of an emphasis on that accuracy, quality along the way. And we spend a lot of time, and you'll find much more of this in the paper, we spend a lot of time asking people about how they measure them and how frequently they measure. So it's one thing to say that these are things we do measure. We then went back and said, okay, so do you measure these less than once per year, or do you do it 4 or more times per year, for example? And as you can see here, this is where quality does move up. So quality sort of far more likely to be assessed than it was as a sort of listed as the most important of topics. I'll leave that up there. There's a lot of information on here. So basically, the color gradation is the frequency diminishing as you go across the slide. Megan and team, have we got the polling working, or should I keep moving?
Nope, we've got it. You should see it now.
We do? Okay. So let me ask, while we're posting that, I'll ask the question to the group here about whether you manage the impact of your samples and literature and any other sort of fulfillment pieces that you send. Do you measure that to the last mile? And you should see a polling question popping up any second.
Okay, we're going to be closing that poll now.
Okay, so here are the results of the jury, as it were, that we from the survey that we did. As you can see, that in this case, I have it split across. From those of you on the phone, 45% said yes, 15% said no, and 30% weren't sure, with 10% who didn't get a chance to answer. So I think we have this question in the paper, not broken out by maturity, so the fairer comparison, but by far the highest response, certainly in terms of yes, no, we see a 3-to-1 response on the phone in favor of those that are. And closely linked with that in terms of the actual usage of materials in the field, again, you can see huge discrepancy here between those that we evaluated to be leaders and those that we evaluated to be laggards. So those that sort of have visibility, and again, is this a measurement question or is this a culture question? But those that do have visibility into how the marketing consumables are actually used in the field. And then from a measurement point of view, and again, is this a culture question or an analytics question, but do we measure the impact of fulfillment? It seems like a basic question. And yet, even with the leaders, only just over a third are saying that they strongly agree that they regularly and consistently measure the impact of fulfillment on marketing campaigns. As you can see, most of them agree in some shape or form, but still only sort of a little over a third of the laggards measuring, again, regularly and consistently measuring the impact of fulfillment on marketing campaigns. Our interpretation of that was that most people are measuring fulfillment in some shape or form, but not measuring the impact of fulfillment on marketing campaigns. Again, to sort of elevate the role to sort of have a more strategic conversation within the organization. These are the types of things that will encourage others to sit up and listen, to engage in the conversation when you can actually say, hey, we're improving your marketing campaigns, or if you don't provide additional budget for us, it's going to have a negative impact on your marketing campaigns. But you have to start again with that measurement before you can actually improve. Again, big disparity in the dedicated resources. So do you have people responsible for analyzing and optimizing, so not just analyzing, but analyzing and optimizing marketing fulfillment process relative to your company's technology today? Again, big swing. I think you get the point in terms of the differences here between the leaders and the laggards. And then finally, the last one in this section relates to sort of how they're organized. And it was interesting, we had a lot of questions around here. I've just chosen one to show. But my company has a centralized analytics function to analyze and predict the optimal usage and the impact of marketing fulfillment. And you can see the difference between the two. With only, we're down less than a quarter of laggards agreeing that there's that centralized function. So I think you can call that correlation. I definitely wouldn't call it causation, to say that those that have a centralized group tend to be leaders, but there's definitely something's going on here that you can say that there's some linkage between that notion of a center of excellence within the business and the sort of elevation of the role within the business. So I'm going to go relatively quickly over the next section. I think you guys are getting the point here in terms of technology, in terms of the differences between the groups, but just sort of 4 quick slides on technology. And again, we sort of found big differences in how people use technology and how they're doing their selection. So what we found is that leaders are definitely using technology to optimize processes and optimize the entire marketing fulfillment process. So really making technology work for them, and again, up above 90% of companies doing that. They also, probably not a big surprise given the above, or given this slide, but they have a defined technology strategy. Again, sort of almost a third of those, and then 2/3 that have that agree to that statement. None of the laggards agreed that they had a defined marketing fulfillment technology strategy. Again, tightly coupled with this probably is the fact that leaders are investing. So we have the right technology in-house to optimize marketing fulfillment. And then they're choosing their partners carefully and strategically. My company has chosen its marketing fulfillment partners in a strategic manner. You can see, again, 85% agreeing. So apologies for going over that last section quickly. I did want to move on and make sure I leave time for Tanya and Megan to speak. So let me just wrap up real quick. I'm going to give you some key takeaways and some recommendations before I hand back to Megan. First up is, as I showed, I think most firms tend to overestimate their sophistication and maturity. Only 13% of overall firms, 10% of food and beverage are leaders. So recognize that if you're not there, you're not alone, and work towards how to get there. I'll come on to that in the recommendations. Think about culturally, think about how marketing fulfillment can be a key part of the marketing team. As I said, in most organizations, they're going to have to do some work to earn that seat at the table. It's not going to be an automatic by any stretch of the imagination. Measurement and analytics, absolutely crucial step to evolving maturity, and a whole host of different things we talked about that you can measure. And then, finding that right combination of whether it's service providers, technology, whatever else, but plugging in and investing in the right things that are going to help you measure and then optimize what you're doing. Definitely saw that across the maturity levels, that there's significant disparity there. So what do you do when you hang up the phone today and beyond? What I would do is sort of, it seems obvious to say start by assessing where you are. As I mentioned, we did produce a self-assessment tool that you can use to do a quick sort of assessment of where do you fit. Then take an honest and a really honest look internally at where you are. How ready are we? Where do we think we can get to? Maybe have a few different people take that assessment and talk about the differences in what you find too. Start with cultural impressions. You're not going to change anything until you start to change that. And so you may even need to sort of start to build a campaign to change the impression of your team, to give yourselves the permission to try to change anything else. Then set your roadmap, your timeline. It's all going to depend on where you're starting from, obviously. And then think about, what do I need to plug in? What do I need to elevate this role and to elevate what I'm delivering, to measure better, and to optimize more what it is I deliver to the organization. So with that, let me hand over to Megan, who I think is going to introduce Tanya.
Great. Thank you so much, Dave. That was a great presentation. And in fact, we actually have Tanya Labrador with us, who's going to share with us about Otis and what they've done, because they've followed many of these recommendations already within their organization. So with that, Tanya, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Megan. Thank you, Archway, for having me here today. I just wanted to share some personal experience of working with a fulfillment provider, having gone through many of the steps that Dave had described. Working with Otis Bultmeier on the sweet baked goods side, our company chose to outsource the fulfillment of our products many years ago, but unfortunately on the marketing material side, as Dave said, oftentimes the culture of having that benefit of the full customer experience is oversighted when it comes to fulfillment of marketing and merchandising. So several years back, I moved over to the merchandising side and had the option to change some of that culture and to bring in some enlightenment that, you know, it is a full customer experience. It's not just the providing of the products, but it's also the servicing of the marketing goods and the displaying of those products that really brings a full circle experience and that keeps customers satisfied. So we made the decision as a company that it was important to us to outsource our fulfillment of our marketing and merchandising goods. And when we sought a provider, we were looking for things such as expertise in the warehousing, management, and order fulfillment side, because we had a large portfolio of products that we were looking to have fulfilled, such as ovens, equipment, packaging, and also printed materials. But in addition to the expertise, we needed that flexibility because our ordering patterns were erratic. As Dave mentioned earlier, we need that flexibility to increase at an order's point or perhaps decrease, or even in Otis's situations, to adjust to the daily order patterns that can be so vary and fluctuating from 70 orders in a day up to 900 orders in a day. And those orders could consist from anything from one product to up to 38 products, and the counts of those going out from 1 to 50,000 pieces. So we needed our provider to be flexible and accommodating to that flexibility. And then finally, we needed them to be scalable. We needed, as we continue to grow as a company through acquisition and consolidation efforts, that our provider could grow with us. And what we chose as a provider was Archway, or whom we chose rather was Archway. We found that they offered the solutions that we were looking for. We wanted to continue to be the beautiful iceberg at the top, but we knew that the foundation was so much grander than what the customer sees. And for us, Archway provided that beneath the water approach. They had the proficiency in order fulfillment. They were accurate with their packing and shipping, the quality control in their order, in their inventory management, and in their order management, and expertise in freight management. It allowed us to engage in full and best practices of a fulfillment provider. They were also reliable and consistent. They were able to meet our very demanding requirements of same-day ship. We send you an order, whether it's 70 orders or 900 orders, our expectation is that you fill every order with accuracy and on time. And what we've gained from partnering with Archway is a 99.9% on-time shipping. We utilize EDI transmissions to maintain perpetual inventories, and we have found that our inventory variance with partnering with them is less than 1% variance, 0.01% variance. So for those of you that are looking for that added need to go to your executives to make that argument for cultural change, here's some very specific analytical points that you could use that we have experience with using an outside provider. And then also continuous improvement. You know, it's all about what goes beyond that transaction for our customers, and I think for us as companies as well, our expectation is that our partners aren't just delivering that service, they're also delivering continuous improvement and innovation beyond that. And for us, the key analytics and reporting that Archway provides has given us the ability to measure our key performance indicators and to make improvements and changes where we felt that those were needed. They've also provided us with some online freight management tools so that when you have, you know, limited resources to try and to get the job done and do it well, you know, they've added that extra technology that we've needed as a company to continue to be progressive. And then finally, taking certain areas of our company, such as print management, and owning it for us, you know, making it executable and deliverable with results. So as a result, our sweet results from partnering with an outsourced fulfillment provider is that, as I mentioned, our performance and capabilities have definitely improved. We've been able to address international shipping, which has always been a challenge for us as a company. We're 100% electrical interface so that we have real-time deliverable results at a fingertip. And the reporting and analytics that I mentioned, we have those to be able to improve our processes. And here's another key point is that we found that we can reduce our costs, in fact, by grouping with other clients at Archway Services. We get even deeper discounts when we're talking about printing and transportation. And then finally, I think for us as a company, the most profound benefit that we've had is that we can take the resources that are intended to be our marketing experts and leaders and champions and allow them to stay focused on those type functions, to turn it over for the fulfillment side to allow somebody that has expertise to do that and do it well. And we are able to stay focused on our vision, which is to become loved worldwide. And as we grow and integrate, we can synergize with our sister companies, and we can prepare for new acquisitions and integrations.
Thank you so much, Tanya. You've done a great job illustrating the way that you've really made Audit take a leadership position in marketing execution. And with that and Forrester's recommendations, we just wanted to take a minute to share quickly with you some of the other things that we've seen for solutions for food and beverage companies. We really believe that a complete food and beverage solution needs to include, first and foremost, safe distribution of food products and recall management support. It's critical that your fulfillment facility must be FDA warehouse food distributor registered and meet or exceed FDA's recall requirements, being able to recall at least 88% of the ship tos within 24 hours. So ask yourself, does your current solution provide you with quick visibility to be able to do this? Tanya, you alluded to this a little bit. Integrated online ordering. You need to make sure that you are online, that your system is easy to use, and whether it's your system or your fulfillment partners, it needs to be easy for everybody, whether it's your sales reps or your marketing people or your operations people. And you need to have visibility into inventory levels. Having access to inventory levels, low water alerts, inventory activity, and how your campaign is performing is critical to being able to make changes on the fly. And then there's the product launch and event marketing support. It's great to have a solution that's robust enough to manage not only your daily orders, but new product launches, test markets, social media campaigns, and trade shows. Bundling these components through one fulfillment provider will provide even greater visibility so you can track all of the moving pieces. We all know that when you've got multiple vendors out there and you're trying to manage all of them and you've got different disparate systems, that can be a real challenge. And then think about your packaging. Is your packaging for your products and literature not only hitting the mark from a creative standpoint, but also you getting the biggest bang for your buck in terms of efficient design? Will that uniquely shaped box be the right cost to fulfill and ship, or is there a more cost-efficient option? Does your current fulfillment solution give you the flexibility to co-pack and repack your items to meet your needs? You really need to make sure you're working with a partner that is thinking about this and continually giving you ideas. Which brings us to the last point, which is continuous improvement and actionable insights. Make sure you're working with a partner who's always looking for ways to drive savings into your supply chain upstream and downstream, because at the end of the day, it's not just about putting things in boxes, but it's really about the customer experience. So real quickly, just a quick note about Archway. For those of you that are less familiar with Archway, we have a solution for the food and beverage industry that really has 5 key points to it. The first point being order management. Our solution is focused on technology and providing data so you can make better decisions. We provide an online ordering tool called the eStore, so users can place orders online, track orders, run reports, and manage inventory from the site. We can also connect with our client systems if they already have an ordering system. The next part is paper and food products fulfillment. So we fulfill paper and food products to consumers, sales reps, retail partners, and DCs. And whether it's collateral, a rebate, displays, food samples, or promotional products, we have the warehousing certifications and systems in place for on-time and quality delivery. And the next part, certified distribution and recall management. So safe distribution of food is our top priority. In the event of a recall, we can exceed the FDA requirements and support your efforts quickly through our systems and processes. And then packaging. We provide co-packing and repacking services for test markets, packaging to promote multiple brands, specialty kitting, and special labeling. We also have packaging engineers that review materials to determine the best way to pick, pack, and ship them to reduce waste and cost from the process. And then finally, we have reporting and analytics. We support your programs through reporting and analytics so you can have complete visibility to the success of your programs. So what do you do with all of this? Tanya gave us some great recommendations, Dave gave us some great recommendations, but if you still feel like there's too much to tackle within your organization and you don't have enough time to do it, Archway actually offers assessments. We'll come in, we'll speak with your sales teams, we'll speak with your operations people, we will do a best practice review and be able to provide you with a full assessment of how to improve your process and where to cut out waste. If you're interested in learning more about this, please contact me, and I can get you more details and share with you what we've done for other clients. And then the last thing I wanted to touch on was just some additional resources. We've got our self-assessment survey that we'll be sending out after this presentation. And this survey has 20 questions and will help you understand the Forrester Maturity Scale and where your company ranks. Whether you're a leader, a latent, or a laggard, it'll let you know how to take that next step. You can also download the complete report that Dave and the Forrester team put together, and that is listed here, and we'll be sending a link out to that as well. And then lastly, we also partnered with the CMO Council in a global study that interviewed senior marketing executives. The study addresses how well marketing content and consumables are delivered to the front line, and how much this impacts the sales effectiveness, revenue generation, and customer retention. So with that, we've got a few minutes left here to take some questions, so we'll open it up for questions at this time. You can submit questions to us through the Q&A chat, so I'll give it a minute here. Okay, so it looks like, Dave, this first question that's come through is for you. What should companies be measuring when analyzing the effectiveness of their marketing fulfillment programs?
So I think I would say Tanya answered this best actually in terms of what the results they found. So, you know, I talked during my section around sort of there's obviously some of the operational elements like timeliness and the accuracy and quality of delivery. There's the actual use of materials, and then there's the sort of the efficiency of the process. But I loved what Tanya said around sort of, you know, they saw improved performance and capabilities. They saw decreased costs, which obviously ties into the efficiency of the process. And the redirect resources is also part of that efficiency of the process. So I think there's a lot in there to be measuring. If you're only measuring one or two of those right now, I would layer on another one or two. And whatever you're not doing, I think they would be the things that I would look to add.
Great. All right, so this next one I'll take. What is the average timeline for maturity engagement? So we've seen this with a lot of different clients that we've worked with, but really depending on your current marketing fulfillment state, the average timeline I'd say to reach full maturity can take anywhere from 9 to 12 months. There are a number of different elements that drive the maturity process, which include analyzing your current process, implementing your process improvements and best practices, and then deploying technology tools, and then further analyzing until your whole process is optimized. Okay, it looks like we've got one more here. If my company is a latent, does it matter if we get to a leadership position? Dave, do you want to take that?
Sure. And I think the short answer is it's kind of it's up to you. I mean, I think there's a cost-benefit analysis to everything, but what we typically find is that latents have access to technology, data, at least some resources, but often not sort of leveraging those in a fully strategic way, often don't have visibility throughout the cycle, that sort of last mile question that we had and that type of thing. So I think there's a number of things that it's hard to talk in generalization. That is the generalization, if you like. The only reason I would say that it's not worth it is if it's going to be it's going to cost more than the benefit, and that's really going to come down to a specific organization. For example, if it's going to just be too much hassle to knock down certain walls, barriers in the way, and you just don't see the benefit to knocking those down in the return, then maybe not. But otherwise, I struggle to find a reason why a company wouldn't. It might not be easy, it might take you a long time, but I don't know any other reason why it wouldn't be worth sort of marching in that direction.
Okay, great. Well, I think that's it for our questions. Again, I just really want to encourage people to download the report. We'll send a link out to it. There's just so much insight in this report, and we just think it's so valuable as people are looking at optimizing their processes and reducing costs. Tanya, thank you so much for your time today. Dave, thank you for your time. And everybody on the call, we really appreciate it. Thanks.